Hi guys, and welcome back to Voice of Geekdom. Please subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, and click the bell icon button to stay up to date with my latest uploads. Last time, we picked up immediately where we left off after the darkening of Valinor in Chapter 8, with the Valar in stunned mourning for the loss of the trees. Feanor flatly refuses to surrender his Silmarils to Yavanna to restore the light of the trees, and then news arrives that Morgoth had hit his stronghold in the north, killing his father Finwë and emptying the vaults of all of Feanor's treasure, including the Silmarils. Next, we followed the escape of Morgoth, who vanished from Aman through the north, crossing the Helcaraxes and entering back into Middle-earth. Then, with his former fortress of Utumno destroyed back in Chapter 3, he sets himself up in Sauron's former base of operations, which was Angband, up in the northwest and above the lands that we will later come to know as Beleriand. Meanwhile, over in Aman, Feanor made a powerful and emotive speech in Tirion before the Noldor people, inciting them to rebel against the Valar and return to the lands of their birth, to chase Morgoth and voyage back to Middle-earth in the east. When he is done speaking, Feanor and his 7 sons take an oath together to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world any whoso should hold or take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. After the pivotal moment of the oath-taking, the remainder of the debate is summed up neatly by the narrator, who gives us a rundown of the decisions that each of the various members of the Noldor ruling house reaches here. Let's start with Fingolfin. He, remember, had already made a sort of commitment of his own back in Chapter 8. "Thou shalt lead and I will follow. May no new grief divide us," was what he told Feanor then, before the throne of Manwë. Here, to his credit, he speaks against Feanor and his sons, alongside also his own son Turgon. Finarfin, the youngest brother, speaks softly, as was his wont, to try to stop the fierce words of his 2 elder brothers from spilling over into violence. This is Finarfin's first real noteworthy contribution to the storyline. It would seem that, to his great credit, he has more of the peace-loving nature of the Vanyar kindred of his mother in him. The children of the 2 younger brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin, are quite divided generally, but not perhaps in the ways that you might imagine. Of particular note here is Galadriel, who gets her first big moment of the Silmarillion. Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand that day tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide, unguarded lands, and to rule there a realm at her own will. Galadriel has never seen Middle-earth before, having been born in Valinor under the light of the trees, which explains her fascination with seeing the outer lands for herself. We know that ultimately, of course, Galadriel will one day come to rule a realm in Rhovanion, east of the Misty Mountains, which will be known as Lothlorien. This origin story for her makes a lot of sense, and gives context to the conversation that she has with Frodo in the chapter The Mirror of Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings. There she says to the ring bearer, who had just tried to give her the ring, I pass the test. I will diminish and go into the west, and remain Galadriel. Galadriel's test is one that fate or the Valar have set for her return to Valinor. She sees it as a test to reject power because of the exile that she chooses for herself here in this passage. Her passing of this test signifies her worthiness to return into the West after this decision that she made over 7,000 years beforehand. When she makes the decision to follow Feanor east, this is a much younger, more inexperienced Galadriel, who has the pride of her people in her and who was swayed by Feanor's words, although she had no great love for him. Although the speech of Feanor had inflamed the passions of the Noldor, the majority of the people refused to renounce Fingolfin as king, and so they marched in two hosts, with Fingolfin's the larger of the two, and Feanor's host in front. Fingolfin did not truly wish to go, but he was urged by his eldest son Fingon, who was more sympathetic to Feanor's objectives than Turgon was. And Fingolfin did not like the idea of abandoning any of his people or his own sons to be ruled by Feanor. But perhaps more importantly, he may have felt bound by the words that he had spoken before Manwë, and his decision then to follow Feanor's lead. Finarfin, for now, follows Feanor too, for much the same reasons as Fingolfin, but he was even more reluctant to depart and followed mostly out of an obligation to maintain the unity of the House of Finwë. As the Noldor prepared to depart, Manwë at last sent a herald to them, who cautioned the Noldor against leaving, warning of sorrow to come if they follow this path. The herald tells them that the Valar would not stop them from leaving if they were resolved to do so, but then he reissues the exile of Feanor for the crime of the oath that he took. Feanor merely looks at this with ridicule, seeing as how he had already been banished from Tirion, and that he had already broken the ban now in order to return. The Valar are blindsided by Feanor's resolve to leave Aman, and they cannot now prevent the mass exodus of the Noldor. The efforts of the herald that Manwë sent to them have only strengthened Feanor's hold over his own house, and have done nothing to turn back the host of Fingolfin either. The Noldor march now, and they head north to Alqualondë, the city haven of the Teleri. Feanor knew that he needed ships to follow Morgoth to Middle-earth, and he tried to persuade the Teleri, whom his father had been close to join the Noldor in his rebellion. Then Feanor grew wrathful, for he still feared delay, and hotly he spoke to Olwë.
You renounce your friendship even in the hour of our need, yet you were glad indeed to receive our aid when you came at last to these shores, faint-hearted loiterers and well-nigh empty-handed. In huts on the beaches would you be dwelling still, had not the Noldor carved out your haven and toiled upon your walls.
But Olwë answered, "We renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave us aid, otherwise then you spoke. In the land of Aman we were to dwell forever as brothers whose houses stand side by side. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. We learned not that craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea, and the white timbers we wrought with our own hands, and the white sails were woven by our wives and our daughters. Therefore we will neither give them nor sell them for any league or friendship. For I say to you, Feanor, son of Finwë, these are to us as are the gems of the Noldor, the work of our hearts, whose like we shall not make again." This last sentence of Olwe's response here deliberately reminds us of the Silmarils, which Feanor is obsessively seeking. It seems fairly clear that Olwe is most likely consciously repeating Feanor's words to the Valar, from the beginning of the chapter back to him. Certainly Tolkien is inviting us to draw that comparison. Feanor's love of his creations and his drive to possess them at all costs tramples over the rights of anyone who gets in his way, and this exchange is an excellent reminder of that, as if we needed one. Feanor leaves and comes back with his sons and the warriors of his house to take the Teleri swan ships by force. The Teleri resist him with their bows and the battle is joined. Many warriors on either side fell on that day. Although the Noldor had the superior weaponry, still the Teleri had the numbers, and they fought hard and repelled the Noldor 3 times, until Fingon arrived with warriors of Fingolfin's house, and the Teleri were overwhelmed. The text pointedly states that Fingon, when he arrived, had not understood that it was Feanor that had started the battle, and that also many of the elves of Fingolfin's host assumed that the Teleri had attacked first, acting upon orders from the Valar. This is important as it keeps the door open for them to be redeemed in the future. The Kinslaying at Alqualonde, as this bloody incident will come to be known, was another of Feanor's famous crimes. The list keeps growing. The Noldor sail northward along the coast. Ossë and Uinen, the 2 Maiar who befriended the Teleri back in chapter 5, are forbidden from interfering, as are all of the Valar, but Uinen's tears for the slaying of the mariners of the Teleri cause a storm to rise against the Noldor, and some of the ships were lost in the voyage north. However, the Noldor eventually made it to the wastes of Araman, in the far north of Aman. There, the doom of the Noldor was spoken by Mandos himself.
"Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you, and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth, from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief, and your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide, and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth, and come not to Mandos, shall grow weary of the world, as with a great burden, and shall wane and become shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken.
Then many quailed, but Feanor hardened his heart, and said,
"We have sworn, and not lightly. This oath we will keep. We are threatened with many evils, and treason not least, but one thing is not said, that we shall suffer from cowardice, from cravens, or the fear of cravens. Therefore I say that we will go on. And this doom I add, the deeds that we shall do shall be the matter of song until the last days of Arda."
Mandos' chilling proclamation at the end of this chapter is a great way to set up the chain of events that we will see when the Noldor return to Middle-earth. There are a number of things that should be highlighted here. First, the opening line about unnumbered tears. This refers forward to the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, as the elves call it in their tongue, which will be named after the first line of the prophecy here. That the Noldor name this battle so is an indication that by the time of that battle, which is still several hundred years and several more chapters from now, they have very much come around to the idea that Mandos had been right all along about the sorrow that lay in their futures, and perhaps many other things besides. Mandos draws attention here to the oath of Feanor, saying that it shall drive them, which is absolutely true, because how could it not drive them? We will see Maedhros and Maglor, the two eldest sons of Feanor, debate this very point later on, as the full horror of the tragedy of the oath which they have bound themselves to becomes overwhelmingly apparent. The other line that I would pick out here is the part about treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason being the causes of the Noldor's evil ends, which will later come to pass. What he is saying here is that the Noldor's defeat will come not from Morgoth, but from within. We will see these factors lead to the downfall of several of the various kingdoms that the Noldor are going to establish in Beleriand, most notably in Gondolin and in Nargothrond, but we'll hear more about that later. Feanor, of course, persists in his quest for Middle-earth, taking no heed to Mandos, although his half-brother Finarfin, who was already wavering, wisely turned back and graciously received the pardon of the Valar, and then went on to become the High King of the Noldor in Tirion. We will see Finarfin again at the end of our tale. All of his children, that's Finrod and Finrod's two younger brothers, Angrod and Eignor, as well as their sister Galadriel, all return to Middle-earth anyway, without him, journeying with their allies under Fingolfin's banner. All those Noldor who remained then had choices to make. They could attempt to cross the perilous Helcaraxe, just as Morgoth had done before them, or they could sail across in their stolen ships. But there weren't enough ships for all of them, and they already feared treachery, just as Mandos had foreboded in his doom. Feanor and his sons then took all who were loyal to them and stole the fleet in the night, which was mostly manned by Feanor's people anyway, leaving Fingolfin and his people behind, and soon arriving in Middle-earth at the Firth of Drengist, which was the mouth of a river which ran to the south of Lamoth, the region where Morgoth earlier fought Ungoliant. When they had landed, Maedhros asks his father Feanor whom among them should be sent across the ocean again to retrieve Fingolfin and his friend and cousin Fingon the Valiant. But Feanor laughed as one Fey, which pointedly means like someone who is hysterical due to being close to the point of death. And then he orders that all the ships be burned. Back across the sea, the host of Fingolfin is close enough to see the red light far in the distance in the eastern sky. Then Fingolfin, seeing that Feanor had left him to perish in Araman or return in shame to Valinor, was filled with bitterness. But he desired now as never before to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Feanor again. And he and his host wandered long in misery, but their valour and endurance grew with hardship, for they were a mighty people, the elder children undying of Eru Iluvatar, but new come from the Blessed Realm, and not yet weary with the weariness of earth. The fire of their hearts was young, and led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel, they dared to pass into the bitterest north, and finding no other way, they endured at last the terror of the Hel Caraxes and the cruel hills of ice. Few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed that desperate crossing in hardihood or woe. There, Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, was lost, and many others perished also, and it was with a lessened host that Fingolfin set foot at last upon the outer lands. Small love for Feanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him, and blew their trumpets in Middle-earth at the first rising of the moon. The Hel Caraxes, the grinding ice, was deemed impassable before Fingolfin's people braved it. This was a superhuman feat, and one which cost them dearly. Elenwe, Turgon's wife who was lost, was one of the Vanyar, the only Vanyar that we know of who had volunteered to go with the Noldor into the east. Finrod too had a lover who was one of the Vanyar, but they never married, and she was not permitted to go with the Noldor into exile. When Fingolfin arrives in Middle-earth, you would imagine he will have a few strong words in mind to say to his brother. Next time, we will have a retrospective episode, looking at the events of the book so far. Remember to get your comments in before next week, on any of the issues that we've covered in the first 9 chapters of the Silmarillion, or tweet me at VoiceOfGeek with your questions.